we got the story completely wrong in conventional medicine, in my opinion, in light being one and actually minerals and salt being the other, because we've been told for decades to avoid the sunlight and to minimize salt. And I think especially for women, and especially if there's something going on with the thyroid, often the opposite can be the most important advice. And certainly that was the case for me. And I think we often discount some of those things because they are so simple, because they are free, because nobody can make money on them. But I have heard from so many hundreds of women, literally, who, if the only change they made was to try to wake up in alignment with the sun when possible, and to go outside and to spend just 10 or 15 minutes in contact with nature, in the natural light, and breathing before jumping into the day, they started noticing a drastic change in their sleep, which then cascades into a drastic change in hormones, which then cascades into so many positive effects. But it's so easy to discount that because it's so simple.
This podcast is called Reconditioned because this is the place where you'll learn how to truly recondition your entire life. Where other wellness podcasts or platforms focus on one particular area of wellness or inner growth, Reconditioned is a one-stop shop for all of it, so that you can get all the information you need to heal and up-level the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of your life in one place. Because that's what I needed when I was healing from the arthritis I had from the age of 2 that left me disabled by 18. I got myself to a place of complete wellness after a very long journey of immersion into the world of healing, where I learned how to heal the whole self. My purpose now is about bringing that to you, and my Rise membership is an extension of that. For women who want to take their wellness and growth to the next level, there really is nothing out there like it. You'll be part of a global community of like-minded women with access to 14 modules that literally take you through everything you ever need to learn in order to bring your life to a place of balance and abundance. With group coaching calls with me, personalized support, community book club, and so much more. Rise becomes part of your life, your lifestyle, enabling you to thrive in the ways you always dreamed, with me right there beside you, championing you through your journey. It's not always open for enrollment, so if you're hearing this now, it's open and ready for you to enroll. Just go to the show notes for the link or visit laurenvakneen.co.uk/rise. Hi everyone, welcome back to Reconditioned with me, Lauren Vakneen. I have just recorded the most beautiful episode with Katie Wells, aka Wellness Mama. Most of you who are listening to this podcast will be familiar with her. Perhaps you're listening because you've come through Katie and saw this because this was on her social media. So if you are new here, welcome. Thank you for joining. You are in the right place. Katie and I are extremely aligned. I've always felt like we're living these parallel lives, just on opposite sides of the world, where we're doing such similar things, healing, helping others to heal. And this episode was just so gorgeous because Katie is such a light for the world and is so gentle in her healing approach and is very rooted in the feminine, in terms of, when we speak about this in the episode, being rooted in that feminine softness of not everything needs to be so regimented, where she and I both started from that place of healing dis-ease, feeling like everything needed to be regimented, spreadsheets of supplements and, you know, everything, all the things. Whereas now we're both very much more about the energy, about the simple, free things we can do to optimize our well-being. As we really spoke about what those free things are, like what are the most important things we can do for our health. And not just from a perspective of what are the most important things we can do that don't cost money, but from a perspective of actually some of the most important things you can do for your health don't cost money. So we speak about all of those things, about the importance of softening into that while maintaining that groundedness of the masculine that helps us with our executive, our cognitive function, helps us see things through. So all about nuance. We speak a lot about the nuance of medicine, of wellness, and about the work she's been doing over the past however long, decade and a half. And, you know, she's a mum of 6, right? She's she's really got it right in terms of how she speaks about, and I asked her so many questions about managing things like, we talk about all these things about diet. Well, how do you manage it with your kids if you have fussy eaters? Are any of your kids neurodiverse? Because all the things that work for other kids don't always work, when you're trying to implement that for a neurodiverse child. So just such a stunning episode that I'm very excited for you to listen to. We spoke about her brand Wellness, which has just changed everything for me, because she's the one whose advice I was following 10, 12 years ago about toothpaste. I've been on fluoride-free toothpaste my entire life, because I started with a homeopath and a herbalist at 4 years old in 1988. And we were treated from this health food shop, and I wasn't allowed to use any of that. So I've always used fluoride free, but in getting older and teaching myself more about, well, what more do my teeth need? What do my kids' teeth need? So Katie really goes into that, and her Wellness brand was as a result of her many years of research into toothpaste and why none of the toothpaste out there actually kind of ticked all the boxes. And so she talks about that here as well. And you will hear many times throughout this podcast, I'm sure, about wellness and about how you can get those toothpastes. The link is in the show notes. You'll hear a little recording for that as well, where there's a discount code. It's at health, which is HEALF.com. Just pretend you're super cockney. health.com/LaurenV10. Using that link will get you 10% off anything there. And the products are, the brand is called Wellness with an E on the end. So I'm going to leave you to this episode now, because I don't want to bore you anymore with my voice, because you guys just need to listen to Katie and all her incredible wisdom. And I will see you on the other side. Thank you for being here. Fun fact, humans take in more information in one day now than they did in their entire lives in the 1700s. No wonder we're overwhelmed. Our brains and bodies simply haven't evolved to manage this level of stress. And until that evolution happens, if we want to be well in mind and body, we need things that help alleviate this stress. For me, one of the key tools in my daily wellness toolkit that does this is the Sensate. And if you've been here a while, you'll know how genuinely obsessed I am with this product. It is a piece of health tech that fits in the palm of your hand, and it basically sends infrasonic waves through the chest to activate the vagus nerve and calm the autonomic nervous system while you listen to the specially composed audio within the app. I usually use the Sensate for 10 to 20 minutes before I sleep to reduce cortisol levels, calm my brainwave states from the hectic day, and send me into a deep sleep. Clients or friends of mine who have a Sensate have told me that their sleep has never been so good. People who usually struggle with sleep just wake up in the same position they went to sleep in. Everyone needs a Sensate, in my opinion, and I particularly recommend it to anyone who suffers from overwhelm or anxiety, and anyone who wants to deepen their meditation practice. And you can get £30 off the Sensate by visiting getsensate.com and using code Lauren30. That's GETSENSATE.com, Lauren30. Thank you so much to Sensate for supporting our mission here at Reconditioned. Katie Wells is founder and CEO of wellnessmama.com and Wellness. A mum of 6 with a background in journalism, she took health into her own hands and started researching to find answers to her health struggles. Her research turned into a blog and a podcast, and she's now written over 2,000 blog posts, 3 books, and was named one of the 100 most influential people in health and wellness. When she's not reading medical journals, creating new recipes, or recording podcasts, you can find her outside in the sun with her kids or undertaking some DIY remodeling project. Obligatory, additional, unrelated randomness, doula, speed reader, hates bananas, loves baseball, scuba diver, highly experienced in answering the question, why? I love that. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. One of the reasons I feel like we live parallel lives and have been for the past decade, other than the fact that you have 4 more children than me and live in the sunshine. But you and I have done such similar work, and you have, I mean, your bone broth post, your bone broth recipe on your blog must be one of the most like the thing that I share the most of any link. And your work has had such an impact on my own work and my own life. So yeah, I'm really excited to get started. So we always start with the same question here, which is, what have you done so far today to support your wellness?
I love that you start with that question. And it's earlier in the day for me, I think, than you. So
Yes.
not too much yet, but my morning routine is always pretty similar, which is that before I touch a screen, before I do anything else, I go out in the sunshine, stand on the ground barefoot, get natural light in my eyes, and drink at least a quart of water that has salt and minerals in it, because we lose actually quite a bit of water while we're sleeping just through breathing. That's actually also how we lose the majority of, like, if we have fat loss, it actually comes out through our breath, not through what we think of as maybe sweat or exercise. It's actually the breath that removes that from the body. So I'm very focused on hydration in the morning and light. I think actually my mindset's shifted so much in the last 10 years of realizing that often the simple and free things are often the most profound, especially when we do them regularly and consistently. And so those are two of the only things that I do every single day, besides trying to get great sleep, is to get that morning sunlight and hydrate first thing. Often I'll take different supplements in the morning as well before eating, before caffeine, but I'm doing labs tomorrow, so I've been off all supplements this week. But those are really the constants in my health routine, at least in the morning. And then there's a lot I do throughout the day, but those are the ones that really I stick to in the morning.
And I'd love to get onto the ones you do during the day in a bit, but I love what you've said about, you know, how it's changed over the past 10 years and realizing that it's the simple things. I feel like, so I know you've also done a couple of episodes with Ben Greenfield. I had a conversation with Ben Greenfield, and we talked about what he called the softer side of biohacking. I don't see myself as a biohacker. I don't want to be hacking anything. And that's another thing I've realized, I guess. But I do think that kind of, when you're deep into that physical healing, you're so focused on those big physical things you can do. And actually, when you soften into, I guess, the nature and what your body really needs, we realize that there is so much we can do that doesn't require any money, doesn't require too much of our time, and doesn't need as much kind of research and that masculine kind of approach to it. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, well, to echo what you just said, I agree. I feel like the term biohacking is a very masculine term to begin with, but at the root of it, I've had several friends that really like get to the root of language and like have you think about what you're actually saying, whether it be in business with little phrases like tripwire, which people use as like they mean a thing that helps someone to engage with your business, like an initial interaction. But I'm like, you wouldn't want to actually set a tripwire. That's got a very negative connotation. So even in business, I used to call that a welcome mat instead of a tripwire, because I wanted to welcome them, not blow them up. And I think the same is true with biohacking. It just has a very harsh connotation to me and doesn't seem exactly accurate either, because we aren't trying to hack our biology. I try to use the term bioalignment instead. Like really, we're trying to align with our biology, to align with nature, and to align with the way our human bodies were meant to interact with the world. And we've just gotten kind of far away from that in many ways in the modern world. But to your point, I think, especially for women in the health and wellness world, there's something to be gained from embracing that softer side of the feminine. And one question that I ask myself often now that me of 10 years ago would never have thought to ask is, what would I love, or what would my body love in this moment? And I've found that if I actually sit and listen to the intuitive answers to that question, I often get much better results than when I was spreadsheeting everything and had detailed list of supplements and everything was so regimented. I think there's a time and a place for that as well. Yeah. But it seems like when we give our bodies the space to answer that question and to lovingly listen to the response, we often get great answers.
It's so true. Yeah, exactly the same. I'm far less regimented, but like you said, there's a time and a place for it. And I know you and I have both been through our own health struggles, which is what brought us here. So I'd love for you to tell everyone kind of what brought you into this with your own health.
Absolutely. I'll give the short version and then happy to elaborate in any direction you'd like. Essentially, the short version was coming out of school for journalism and working in a pretty stressful journalism environment. And also at the time being pregnant with my first child, I started to notice some strange health symptoms. And after he was born, I was trying to figure out why I still had no energy, why my body just felt really off, and I was so fatigued. And of course, the answers I got from the conventional medical world were that that was just normal postpartum. That was normal for moms. That's normal for being a woman. I know many people have had a similar experience of not really feeling heard or understood by their doctors or receiving lab results that were deemed normal and knowing something still wasn't exactly right internally. And so, with the background in journalism, I started trying to find my own answers when I couldn't get any answers from the medical world. And it was a long journey that I'm so grateful for through many doctors and practitioners, through lots and lots of medical journals. And this also coincided with reading, I believe the statistics shifted and they started reporting right after my son was born that that was going to be the generation that had a shorter life expectancy than their parents. And I think now it's actually anybody born after 1980 is expected on average to have a shorter life expectancy than their parents, which is not normal. This is not the trend we expect to see in the modern world. And so I just started turning to the research side of that and trying to find my own answers. And thankfully, I think we've now seen this widespread movement of people who are taking their health into their own hands, not to discount the benefit of doctors and practitioners by any means. But I say so often on my podcast, we are each our own primary healthcare provider. And we can work. I think the best outcomes actually happen when we work with really knowledgeable practitioners who have specific knowledge we don't. But no doctor, no matter how intelligent, can have the intricate knowledge of our bodies that we have. And so it's a both and it's a taking that responsibility for the daily choices and habits that we have that really equal our health long term, and then working with the practitioners when we need them. So I was a very slow learner in that world. And for many years, I can understand when people feel this way. I wanted a doctor to just be able to give me an answer. I wanted a doctor just to be able to fix me. And in hindsight, I'm so grateful that the journey was not that, and that I got to go on this journey of stepping into the responsibility of health and learning so much along the way. And it seems like so many people are on, like you mentioned in the beginning, parallel journeys of that. And it makes me so excited and grateful to see so many people really taking ownership for their health, for their families, and stepping into that in a big way.
Awesome. So what happened? And you know, to your point quickly first on you know, working with practitioners, I completely agree, because I couldn't have done my journey without some of the amazing, you know, homeopaths and functional medicine doctors and so many, you know, team of incredible people. But the idea, like you say, is to be your own primary healthcare provider. And what you said also about, you know, no doctor, however intelligent they are, can have that innate understanding of your body and your physiology. But just to expand on that, my belief is always also that, you know, in that instance, they're also not looking at the whole person. And I think that, I mean, I know on my journey, that was why it took me so long to heal, because there wasn't one place that could give me everything. It was like I had to go and figure out the physical healing, and then I had to figure out the trauma and the emotional stuff and the mindset stuff, the mental stuff, and then the spiritual. And there's no one person that can give you all of that. So, you know, kind of cultivating your own practice and your own research is such an integral part of this, you know, health optimization journey. So what was it in your health in the end? What did you find out? What were you led to?
Yeah. So the word that they gave me finally as a diagnostic code was Hashimoto's, which I was deemed as having, and the medical world will tell you that you never can get rid of. It just goes into remission. But at this point, I take no medication or even supplements directly related to thyroid. And all of my labs are not just within their range of normal, but what I actually would consider optimal at this point. But it was a long journey. And I think one thing that was helpful to me, I love that you mentioned the trauma side and the inner work side, because that was the piece I ignored for so long when I had the spreadsheets of supplements and I was doing all the things and I was sort of externally trying to force my body into health. And it wasn't until I realized that there's a very important and beautiful marriage of those things, and that true healing actually encompasses all of that. It's just because of my trauma, I didn't want to look at that side for a long time because it was too hard. And delving into that, let all of those physical things, because those are also, of course, important. It let all of those things start to actually have an effect when I was able to shift into parasympathetic for the first time in decades, when I was able to like address the nervous system side and the emotional health side, because I really believe that even if we're doing all the physical health things, quote unquote, right, if our body is in a state of stress and if our body is convinced that we are not safe, those things aren't able to have the effect that they could because our body's trying to protect us. And at the end of the day, even symptoms, I learned to reframe this. They're not a bad thing. They're actually a wonderful, very clear message from our body of either I need something I'm not getting, or there's something that I'm being exposed to that I don't need, or there's something underlying all of this that you're not addressing. So to me, when I learned to shift that mindset, and instead of like symptoms are bad, must get rid of them, but instead symptoms are messengers, what are you telling me? It became still not an overnight process by any means, but the journey began to actually start to unravel some of those things. And like you said, this is such an individual process, and there's so many factors. There's no single factor. Unfortunately, there's no exact blueprint that works for every human body the same way. And that's why I've always been very hesitant when people ask exactly what supplements I'm taking or exactly what my exercise program looks like or anything that's very specific, because that was very much an N of one journey to figure out what that was. And I'm under no illusion that someone else applying the exact same thing, but with different history and genetics and emotions, is going to have the same result. So instead, I love to talk about the generalities and the blueprint and the foundational so that people can find their own N of one. And I know in the biohacking world, sometimes the N of one is discounted, or people, especially in the medical world, want to see those double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. But I always think an N of one study of our own body is actually the most valuable study we can ever undertake. And so when it comes to your own data and your own information, I think never discount that, because that's some of the most valuable data you can get.
And the challenge in this in the work that we do is that it's so hard to get a lot of people to recognize that, especially in the medical world. It's like this has to be proven by, and then you've got the issue with obviously how biased some medical studies can be, and there's all of that. Let's not go into that. Let's focus on the positive. So obviously, you did just say that it was never. This is literally my whole life's work ethos is it's never just one thing. It has to be a culmination. But were there specific things that you found really helped the thyroid? Because I know that so many of my listeners are healing from all variation of thyroid complications, thyroid issues.
Absolutely. And certainly there's so much nuance. I know I was overwhelmed in the beginning when I started researching it, even just on the simple surface level things of whether iodine is great or iodine is harmful, or whether selenium is vital or too much selenium is going to make you toxic. Like there's so much conflicting information. And I do think that's where some of the nuance comes in, especially with if you're going to do supplements or you're going to do medication and you're working with a practitioner. But I do think the foundational things that were actually the most helpful long-term are somewhat universal. And I talk ad nauseum about this. My listeners are probably tired of hearing about it, but I think there's a really important light-dependent component when it comes to the thyroid, because all of the hormones are, of course, linked, and you can't actually evaluate the thyroid without taking into account your sex hormones, without taking into account your cortisol, without taking into account the symphony of hormones that are working together. And it's not that just one hormone on a lab is going to be out of range. That's a great indicator of, okay, why? It's not, to me, that's not the answer. That's just the first question. And so for each of us, it becomes getting to our own sort of first principle answers of what's going on and what the body actually needs. But I think with the thyroid in particular, and I would say also in general, universally for health, there's this very dependent light component. And I think this is one of two big areas that I would say we got the story completely wrong in conventional medicine, in my opinion, in light being one and actually minerals and salt being the other, because we've been told for decades to avoid the sunlight and to minimize salt. And I think especially for women, and especially if there's something going on with the thyroid, often the opposite can be the most important advice. And certainly that was the case for me. And I think we often discount some of those things because they are so simple, because they are free, because nobody can make money on them. But I have heard from so many hundreds of women, literally, who, if the only change they made was to try to wake up in alignment with the sun when possible, and to go outside and to spend just 10 or 15 minutes in contact with nature, in the natural light, and breathing before jumping into the day, they started noticing a drastic change in their sleep, which then cascades into a drastic change in hormones, which then cascades into so many positive effects. but it's so easy to discount that because it's so simple. I also think with thyroid in particular, there's a whole lot happening on the conversion level, and there is a genetic component at play. But we know that certain wavelengths of light, which are all available for free from the sun, can actually improve the conversion of a lot of those things. And so I know I went through a phase where I was like, oh, red light, there's studies on red light and the thyroid, and this is so important. And I spent thousands of dollars on red lights, and then later realized all of those same spectrums of light that we pay thousands of dollars to buy red lights to have in our house for are available for free in every sunrise and every sunset in exact right levels that our bodies need, much stronger and completely free. And so I think even if there's zero budget for healing, even if we're on a very tight budget, because I was for many, many years, the sun is free. And even if it's a cloudy day, we're getting so much benefit on a cellular level from those spectrums of light of sunrise and sunset that help with all of the conversion of thyroid hormones, as well as cortisol and sex hormones. And over time, that can make a really tremendous difference. Often also with thyroid, there's some stress on the adrenals because the adrenals are trying to compensate for that. And so I think that's where the minerals were a game changer for me. I'm sure everybody's heard about magnesium. I'm so glad we're having a mainstream conversation about magnesium, but I think we haven't talked yet enough about purely salt, sodium and chloride, because often in thyroid, digestion can be a little bit impaired, and energy levels are impaired. And something as simple as a deficiency in salt can actually make those worse. Whereas getting those in the right range can help a lot, even if you're still symptomatic in other ways, or even if you have other things you're going to work on, getting enough of those key minerals can help that process feel a lot more comfortable. So that's the reason I drink salt water every morning, which again goes against the conventional advice completely. I know my parents are in their late 60s and 70s, and the medical world tells them to essentially avoid salt completely. And thankfully, they do the opposite. But even people don't realize how profoundly impactful something as inexpensive as just unrefined sea salt can be, because we know the sodium, our bodies are electric. They depend on that for electrical communication, which is important for healing in any capacity. But even the chloride component of that, when we have sort of slower digestion, thanks to thyroid issues, that chloride is actually used in making stomach acid, hydrochloric acid. And so when we don't have enough bioavailable chloride, our digestion, our stomach acidity can be impaired, which can then also contribute to things like leaky gut. And so I love just really pointing people toward do the foundational simple things. If you need to think of your body as just a house plant that needs sunlight and the right fertilizer to be able to grow, and then get into the nuance, but really get those foundational things dialed in first.
Do you start your day with an adrenal cocktail? Because I did Molly Robbins' work about 8 years ago, and then I kept most of it, but stopped the adrenal cocktail. I don't know why. And I've just started it again after another conversation with Morley, and I already feel great with it. And I've got my kids on it as well. And I just, forgot about the importance of kind of starting your day with that.
Yeah, I do. I alternate. I say I don't do anything every single day except for the sunlight and salt water. And I feel like I get most of the same benefit if I just get the salt water, but I do love his work, and I love his cocktail as well. It's just so easy to dump a teaspoon of salt into a quart-sized mason jar and leave it on my nightstand. So immediately after waking up, I can just drink it. But I think his is awesome as well. And I think even if you can just do that pre-coffee. I think another one for women, especially if you've been living in a stress state or your nervous system has been feeling stress, getting that salt water first thing in the morning, and then also trying to get nutrients and protein before caffeine, before screens, before stress. I know that's a tough one, but that is a very profound safety signal to your body that nutrients are abundant. We are not in a scarcity situation. I don't need to hold on to bodily stress. I can use these nutrients for the correct hormone, for fertility, for all of the cascade of beneficial hormones. And I know there, especially in the male biohacking world, has been a trend of skip breakfast for a long time. For women, I always think it can be a lot more beneficial to at least experiment with really trying to get as much protein and micronutrients early in the day if possible. And if you want to intermittent fast, stop eating when the sun goes down. Stop eating a few hours before bed. Make that fasting window at night instead of in the morning, because that's going to be a lot less stressful, especially on female biology, than not eating till noon and not being in alignment with circadian biology with your fasting.
I completely agree with that. What do you eat on any given day? I think that's a question that people would like to hear the answer to.
Yeah, it varies somewhat. And right now I have, with the 6 kids, half of them are teenagers, soon to be 4 of them are teenagers, and they all do different sports. So there's definitely a focus on cooking enough protein. I would say I spend like 30% of my day just making meals for the kids at this point because they are doing so much activity in the summer. So lots of protein and lots of micronutrients from vegetables, fruits, fermented foods, that kind of thing. What's been interesting for me the last 6 months or so, since I started asking my body the question, what would you love? Instead of just trying to go with what the studies say is the most optimal human diet, I find I'm really gravitating toward definitely clean protein sources. So I eat a lot of grass-fed meats, but also a lot of seafood. Often the answer to that question will be oysters for me. And I live in an environment where those are native. So I eat a lot of oysters. And then also just this time of year, things like a lot of fruit. I have bees, so a decent amount of honey. We have ducks, so duck eggs. I'm trying to be, and then vegetables from the garden. So I'm trying to sort of live as much in alignment with the environment of where I am. I think also that the answer to that question, like I said, it varies seasonally. So in the winter, my diet looked much different, and it was more warm cooked soups and root vegetables. And now it's the things that are in season where I am. I also think on the mineral side of that, there's a little bit of variation based on both where you live and where your ancestry is from. I feel like this part's not being totally talked about. There's a great debate going on in the biohacking world between the salt-based mineral crowd and the plant-based mineral crowd, and which one's better. And I personally feel like it's a both and situation. So I do salt water and I do like humic and fulvic minerals daily. And I think perhaps what works best for people is a little bit based on where your ancestry is. If you came from more coastal areas where you were getting a lot of seafood and you were exposed to the salt water, you might notice more of a benefit initially from the salt side of that. Whereas if your ancestry was more inland, you might feel a bigger difference from the plant, the humic and fulvic. But I think most of us have kind of a mixed ancestry at this point. And so to me, it's a both and. But these were all things I started learning as I just really actually started trying to super tune into what my body specifically wanted. And that's why, again, I won't give like an exact, I eat this many grams of protein and this many grams of carbs, but like a more of a learning to intuitively understand what your body needs, which changes, especially for women, changes monthly, seasonally, daily,
weekly.
So just learning,
So sorry to interrupt the episode, but this really is a public health service announcement. If you're trying to improve or optimize your health, you might be missing the crucial ingredient that most people don't realize they need. You see, it's not vitamin D you need to be supplementing. The mineral we are most lacking and need so much more of in order to be able to synthesize that vitamin D from the sun is copper. Without copper, which gives us retinol, we literally cannot absorb the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K. And the iron in our bodies is not distributed effectively because copper is what transports iron around the blood. So it's not that we're anemic, it's that we are low in copper. Without adequate absorption of all these minerals, your health can never be optimal. So many people I've worked with feel like they've tried everything, and simply introducing Recuperate IQ, which is a very specific formulation of copper and other ingredients, improved their health within weeks. It's formulated by Morley Robbins, who created the root cause protocol that hundreds of thousands of people around the world have healed as a result of. I've personally been doing it for 8 years. This supplement is finally available in the UK after years of me trying to get hold of it, and you can now get it at yourhealthbasket.co.uk using code LaurenV10 for a 10% discount. That's yourhealthbasket.co.uk and code LaurenV10. Do you know, even when I qualified as a nutritionist, and I've never actually had a nutrition client just for nutrition, because again, I feel like, you know, there's so much, if you know, people will come to me and say, I want to lose weight. Can you? And I'm like, well, we need to work on your relationship with food, your relationship with your body. There's so much more. That was just a caveat to I don't work as a nutritionist. But even having studied nutrition, I've never once counted calories or weighed any food. Intuitively, it's never felt right to me. So I'm really glad you said that, because for me, I've always been like that as well. And you do get there's a lot of noise in the industry of you need to weigh this and you need to have this many grams of whatever. I mean, even with supplements, I'm kind of bad at, you know, like measuring stuff. But again, it's intuitive. Like I'm intuitive with my kids with their, you know, things that I give them as well. The ancestral element, I love that you said that. So important. I realized that, I mean, I did the whole plant-based thing for a long time. You know, was pretty much nearly vegan, you know, for 8 years, thinking that that was the healthy way. And then realized, well, that actually really works for my Indian friends. For my family who are from the Middle East, not so much, you know, and I need, what were they eating? They were eating lots of fruits, lots of meats cooked with sweet fruits, because that's what they had. And then I realized, oh, I was giving up all fruit because I didn't want sugar. You know, I thought it would be better to have like no natural sugar, no any sugar. And actually, you know, it was the opposite. So coming back to that inner knowing and that connection to the body. Um, I'm really interested to know more about your parenting, and you have 6 kids. You very rarely actually speak about your kids, which I know is obviously a conscious thing to protect them. What I'm interested, I guess, to know is how. Well, so first of all, do you have any fussy eaters? Please tell me you do.
I have had some that at various phases were quite picky eaters. And I think that of course can be its own whole parenting conversation, because from my own childhood, I had definitely internalized a kind of strange relationship with food. And I think that also goes back to the thing you were talking about with, like, there's kind of an obsession in today's culture with macros and counting and calories and measuring everything. And I think, at least for me, the mindset I was when I started trying to understand my health, and for a lot of women especially, that often can take on a connotation of being very restrictive and prescriptive and regimented, and potentially more harmful over the long term, because that for me contributed to a very negative relationship with how I thought about food. And for a lot of years, I was trying to sort of punish myself into being thin, or like restrict myself into being healthy. And it turns out it doesn't work like that. And so I've been very aware with my kids of trying to help them at least avoid as much as possible the pitfalls of that. And so I don't want to create an environment where I'm overriding the wisdom of their bodies, but also learning that balance of providing structure for them to learn to make healthy choices without exogenously being the decider of their healthy choices. And I think that's such a balancing act that's so different for each child, for each age, for each stage they're going through. But I think it's a dance we learn with them. But I just never wanted to, like, override their innate intelligence. And that doesn't mean, of course, that I have processed food in the house and that's what they have access to. I still think there's a division of responsibility where I'm responsible as their mom for having really nutrient dense food in the house. And they are responsible from the beginning as their own infinite autonomous beings of deciding when they are hungry, what they're hungry for. So I never force you have to eat what I cooked, or you have to eat what's on your plate. But that is what I cooked and that's what's available. So if you don't want that, you can choose from the other healthy foods in the house and make something else. I'm not going to be a short order cook, but letting them listen to the wisdom of their bodies. And even if actually when they say I'm not hungry, it's from pickiness, not from lack of hunger, I feel like that can actually be a great teacher. And I don't want to override that innate wisdom they have. But to your point, I don't use their names publicly. I very rarely post pictures of them until they're old enough to consent, only because I feel like we're part of this grand social experiment in that their generation is the first to grow up on social media. And I know for me, I'm very grateful that social media didn't emerge until I started college. And there are parts of my, especially teenage years, I wouldn't have wanted documented online. And so I wanted them to have at least the same ability to consent or not to being on the internet, to what's shared publicly, because that doesn't ever go away in the online world. That information is always out there. And so I wanted, and what's interesting is with me being so public facing online, I'm finding that my teenagers now who have now phones because they've had a business for a year and who have access to social media are largely choosing not to be on it, and they don't want to be on the internet, don't want to be publicly visible. And they're choosing in-person human interaction, which I love, but I haven't forbidden those things. I just wanted it to be their choice.
Are they homeschooled?
They are homeschooled, but very socially connected through where we live. They can play sports for the school, even if they're homeschooled.
Oh, cool.
And so my oldest he turns 18 this year. He's working as a lifeguard. He's working on a business and then has a really connected social group. And then my next few are competing for the school under various athletics. And so they have large social groups, but without the school day part of the environment.
Oh, I love that. I wish we had that. We opted for school in the end and found a school that's a little more holistic in its approach. But my friend runs a homeschool community, and it's beautiful. Like they homeschool together, you know, so the kids have so many friends and so many different activities, and I love it. Wasn't right for us for right now, but it's such a beautiful thing to do. I've always wondered this actually, just for myself. How have you managed it? Because you put out a heap of content. Like, what people don't see about you is the behind the scenes, because you're so focused on the wellness. Um, I don't think people realize that you are running an incredible business, and you've been extremely business savvy from day one, which I've kind of witnessed, how you've done it. I remember when I was writing my health food blog like 10 years ago, and I was essentially just coaching people for free for 10 years. And people were like, you should do affiliate marketing. You should do this. You should do that. I was like, I don't have time for that. No, I don't have time to make a business from this. But you did that. Like, how, because I have a lot of listeners who are running small businesses on the side of raising young children. How have you managed that and homeschooled them?
Well, I'm glad it looked like that from the outside. It definitely has not always been smooth or effortless or probably in the best interest of health, actually, ironically, because when they were all little, I would often put them to bed and then stay up late working for hours and not get enough sleep, which I don't recommend. And I don't think I would choose again in hindsight. But I do think this is an area actually where the more masculine systemization side can be helpful. So I read a book called The E-Myth early on, which talked about essentially when you're building a business, sort of systematizing the roles. And at first, you're doing all of them because you are the business owner. But then, as you're able to hand off things, you've created systems around them and you still understand how they work. So you're able to manage with less stress and with more understanding. And so I did that. And to this day, I have a very small team. There's really just three people that are all actually technically part-time and who are all moms. That was important to me, is that I wanted it to be aligned with the mission. And then I've just tried to really solve for the variable of efficiency and optimization in each of those capacities so that I can maximize my time in. So I can't obviously outsource podcasts. I don't like outsourcing writing, things like that. But that I can maximize the time spent there and let everybody on the team work within their area of genius. Especially right now, I feel like when my oldest turned 16, I started hearing that song from the musical Mamma Mia slipping through my fingers. I just kept hearing that in my head every time I saw him. And I realized how short and how fast that phase goes by. And I feel like he's going to turn 18 this year. And then I've got so many more right behind him. And then motherhood will be over. And so for me right now, I'm really trying to choose motherhood and make that, it's always been my first priority, but from a time perspective, make that my main priority right now. And so I'm very grateful for the structure that has been in place now for so long, because unless I'm recording a podcast or very actively writing, I'm trying just to be as present as possible with my kids and off technology in these like last short years that I have with them. But thank you for saying that. It's been a work in progress for a lot of years to put all those systems in place. And now I'm very grateful they're there.
And just to clarify, I didn't mean that I think it looked easy. What I meant was that it just seemed like you were very business savvy from day one, that you knew how to, reach more people, how to make this a business, how to support your family through helping others. And not that it looks simple, but it just looks like you kind of knew what you were doing, even if maybe you didn't and you were learning along the way. But I mean, mine are only 8 and 5, but I have the exact same feeling all the time of they're just getting big so quickly. And when your business is new, or, you are running this small business, and you have to find those times. And it's so hard to put it to the side and just go and be with the kids. But it's such a priority, because that you're never going to get that time back. I'm just feeling that very deeply now.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend Dane says something really cool. I think it's a helpful reframe, because we hear from the media a lot of, women are such a minority in business and there aren't enough women CEOs. And he points out that he thinks moms especially are actually the most innately wired to be excellent at running a business, because he's like, if you boil it down to its core, business really is about solving a pain and creating community. And that's what moms do all day, every day. And so I think the balance for us as moms is not letting the family side of that, the most important side of that, slide in the process of creating a business. But I think that was such a helpful reframe to think like, oh, we are actually wired to be able to run a business well, because really at the end of the day, business is about helping people and creating community. And we know how to do that.
So true. I love that. I mean, what you said about food as well is, strikes a chord, because my son has a sensory aversion to food. It has been most of my listeners know about it, but for those who are tuning in who haven't, it's been such a journey, and it took me until about 2 years ago to speak to a spiritual teacher who said, you already talk about the fact that everything is energy. So why are you not translating that into the food? The energy and the love that you put into whatever he's eating has to nourish him. So if all he's going to eat is fries, you got to look at that and go, please let this nourish his body. And that's what I do now. Because I can't get him to change. I mean, he's never eaten a vegetable in his life. You can only imagine like the stress. And I've had to let go of that stress and that pressure on me of what's going to happen to him as a result. And you know, there is some innate intelligence in that in itself. Like there must be a reason why, and you know, we've worked through all the reasons of why he has this and worked back and figured it all out. But it's just kind of releasing my own attachment to it as well. And kind of how I've come to it now is I let him eat what it is that he can eat, while always educating him, just the family generally, on healthy food choices without giving him the shame, because that was the worst part, right? You know, oh, your friend's eating this, why can't you eat that? You know? And I think that's so detrimental. So now it's like he'll be eating whatever. And if I'm cooking something, I'll say, hey, come over here and have a look at this vegetable. Like, do you know how cool this vegetable is? It does such and such and such or whatever. But I'm not with any, do you want to try it? I don't ever say that anymore. I just teach him about it and just hope that at some day, and I'm still in the thick of it, right? I have no idea if this will work, but I just hope and pray that it will. One thing I want to ask you is what have been kind of the key fundamental, I suppose, practices for your family that you've implemented that you believe to be the most beneficial, and also things that maybe, you know, the average mum isn't doing at all, but that is such an ingrained part of your family life?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And also, just to speak to what you're doing with your son, I think that is so amazing and beautiful the way that you're handling that and navigating, respecting, and honoring his agency and his autonomy as a fully functional human being, even though he's still a child, and not forcing that. And especially what you said about not putting that shame into the equation. I think how many of us as adults have to unpattern the shame that we inadvertently learned from parents who were extremely well-meaning, but who we internalized at a young age, something was wrong with us, or just having to let that go. So I think just to honor what you said, I think that's so beautiful. And there's so much wisdom in that.
Thank you. It's been, I mean, it hasn't always been like this. It's been a learning curve, like everything is, right? And we learn through our parenting. We're never going to get it all right. And I have shame on how I dealt with it at the beginning. I was like, how is this possible? Like I'm a health coach. I've healed myself from like long-term juvenile arthritis, and my son won't eat a vegetable. So there was all this shame around it with me as well. But do you know one of the lessons I think it taught me? I think it taught me, I think I could have easily been a really judgy mum. Like, well, if you hadn't given him that food in the first place, he never would have known to like it. But because he's been like this since he was a baby, like how can I ever be like that? I can completely understand now and have compassion for wherever anyone's at. So it's definitely, you know, I appreciate you saying that, but I haven't been doing this the whole time. I wish I had, but it's all a learning curve. It's all a journey.
And what incredible teachers these little humans are. I feel like they are truly the best teachers I've ever had. And I relate to that as well, because for my first two kids, all the pregnancy books and the birth books, I would skip the sections on C-sections because I was like, well, I'm obviously never going to have one of those. Like I would never. And my third, I had placenta previa that they didn't catch. I had an ultrasound, and at 35 weeks, I hemorrhaged. I technically medically died. He was an emergency C-section. I had no knowledge of what was happening because I didn't read those parts of the book. And then I got to recover from that. And I'm in hindsight so grateful, because I was that judgy mom who would like, how could anyone choose a C-section knowing what we know about it? And then I realized that saved my life and his. The recovery is so much tougher. And my heart, I now have so much empathy for moms, no matter what their birthing experience was. I think birth is beautiful however it is meant to happen. And I'm extremely grateful for the medical world that saved my life.
Yeah,
but
totally. I mean, I had an ectopic pregnancy, and again, like you know, when people are like, why are you against modern medicine? I was like, I'm not. I'm against masking dis-ease. I think that most of the chronic conditions we suffer from are preventable. But I'm really freaking grateful for emergency surgery and, stuff like that. So there's so much nuance in it. And what you said about cesareans, it all comes down to informed choice. So yes, like any type of birth. But the thing is on the flip side, you weren't informed on cesareans, right? So it's that's what informed choice is. It's about informing ourselves on every aspect of this motherhood journey and whatever's going to happen as a result of that.
Absolutely. And to circle to your other question, which I love, about what might be different in my approach with my family, I think in our house, it all goes back to sort of family culture. And then that drives all the actual day-to-day choices and interactions. And so I would say the things that maybe aren't as common or intuitive in a lot of families are, I've, like everything, tried to really distill parenting to the first principles approach of what is my hope or my goal for my kids in only the parts that I can control, because they're their own infinite autonomous humans. And how can I then best support that through my own actions? I think part of that, so that leads to first principles of first and foremost respecting that at the end of the day, they are always from birth, from the moment I meet them, their own infinite autonomous being. They are not loading into being a full human. They already are. And as such, they have agency and autonomy. And so that means things like on a practical level, I won't do things for them once they're capable of doing it, because that would be actually an insult to their agency as a human being, which from a practical perspective means in my house, have all been doing laundry for themselves by about age 4 or 5 because they were
Wow.
capable. From a practical level, that actually helps a lot because I physically at this point could not do laundry for 6 people and do everything for everybody.
Are they all doing their own individual laundry? Because then you've got like 8 loads of laundry going on constantly.
They do, but they actually systematized it themselves without my instruction. So there's different days when they each do all their laundry. And then if they're doing their own laundry and there's towels in the laundry room, they'll also run a load of towels because we're all using the towels. I think the biggest example of that, I came home from podcast one day and they were sitting around the kitchen table and they told me, "Hey mom, we redid the kitchen system. And essentially, like, we got this. We don't need you to tell us how to do it anymore. We figured out a better system." And they made a chart that's on the fridge, and they each have a certain number of meals throughout the week that they're responsible for based on their age. So the older ones took more meals. The youngest just has, I think, 2 that she's responsible for now. And
how old is the youngest?
She's 8. And they have a time schedule. So like breakfast, the kitchen has to be cleaned by 10 a.m. Lunch is 3, dinner is 8. And they have a checklist for it that includes wiping down, sweeping, doing the dishes, but like cutting boards can be left out to dry so they can fully dry before they're put away. They have this whole system, and then they built sort of an economy around it of they enforce it. I don't remind anyone. If somebody misses a meal, the other ones can bid for IOUs, but they just created this whole sort of economic system of kitchen cleaning all on their own.
This
and
is
took
incredible.
responsibility for that. But I think that comes from that they've been hopefully they've felt respected as complete humans from the very beginning. And so they've never doubted that they were capable of doing something. I think that also exhibits in just like little interactions. So my parents were amazing, but my mom was somewhat risk adverse. And so I remember learning, like early childhood, learning to walk or climb or whatever. And the soundtrack of that was often, "Be careful, be careful."
My dad's the same.
So I've tried very hard not to say, "Be careful," because I don't want to create a dynamic of the world is a scary place that we need to be afraid of. But to just be like, "Ooh, interesting, you're climbing on the roof. What's your plan?" And let them think like, "Oh, what's my plan?" And so that's been a shift. And I have found that are often much more physically capable than I would have expected at their age. And I just try not to have that like outward like response, which also means several of them are pole vaulters. So they fling themselves 11, 12 feet in the air. And it's been great practice to not when they go flying through the air. But I think that's why it's like a culture first perspective. And the same thing that also shows up in the way they interact with food. It's not me mandating their food choices. It's just like we have a conversation about the way that food is essentially biological and energetic signals to our body. And so what do we want to tell our bodies? And then let them choose what they want to tell their body. And I've noticed that even at younger ages, as they've learned that, and with the caveat they did have picky phases, but they often make good choices as they get older because they have that foundational knowledge and they start to pay attention to how do they feel. And so I would say for your son too, he's young and he has that foundation from you. So I would guess that as he gets older, those choices just naturally start happening because he doesn't feel like he has to, and there's not that shame attached. And also even from the beginning with 2-year-olds, any mom knows just practical experience, you can't ever actually make them do anything. You can't make them eat the food that you want. You can't stick it in their mouth and force them to chew. Even when they're little, it is actually their choice. And so how can we honor and respect that while still giving them the tools to make good choices when they decide to?
One of the holistic living challenges I spent years researching and trying to figure out was how to keep teeth healthy without fluoride and which fluoride-free natural toothpaste to use. I've found a few over the years that I've liked, but I've finally found a brand that does a toothpaste that me and my husband love, and a kids one that not only has all the perfect ingredients to keep their teeth and gums healthy naturally, but that they love. The toothpastes are by Wellness, which is the brand created by Katie Wells, aka Wellness Mama, who we love here at Reconditioned. I'm such a fan of these toothpastes and I would love you to give them a go. And no, they're not as cheap as Colgate, and for good reason. But you can get 10% off by visiting health.com/LaurenV10. That's health with an F, health.com/LaurenV10. And that will apply a 10% discount to anything in your basket, not just wellness products. Please report back to me and let me know how you find these toothpastes. Yeah. I think so many people are going to be listening to you feeling really empowered, because I think a lot of our issue as mums is, or as parents generally, that we feel that we have to instill all these rules and we have to tell our kids, we have to make sure they eat healthily and we have to make sure they do this and do that. And it almost puts just so much pressure on us, where when we can recognize, like you say, they're their own autonomous, sovereign beings, it almost is a bit liberating. I'm the same as you with, I've never said careful to my kids. I always let them do anything. I actually think, and I don't know how you feel about this, that there is an environmental element to that as well. I think there are some environmental toxins my kids have never been exposed to, and I think that's helped their gross motor skills in terms of how they, they've been climbing since they were babies, and I remember observing them alongside other kids when they were toddlers, like really little toddlers who like wouldn't climb or go up on anything, and I used to think to myself, how are both my kids then very climby and very physical and able to figure out where to put the hand, where to put the foot. And I like everything, like you said, which is my life's ethos, everything's nuanced, right? It's never just one thing. But I think that there is a component in there of keeping the brain free of heavy metals, of, other environmental toxins that affect those gross motor skills and fine motor skills.
Absolutely. I agree. Yes, certainly nuanced, but it does seem like there's a component of that. And then also it compounds. So if they're allowed from an early age to interact with the world in that way, and we're not removing them from high objects and taking away things that could be dangerous, and they're learning that slowly and age appropriately as they go, they just have this amazing context of interacting with the world as an adventure rather than something scary to be avoided. And so I feel like they're more willing to embrace it and explore it. And I don't know, I think they're better at that than I am. I'm still learning.
Saying that, with the caveat of this week, my son, from all his jumping, has smashed his teeth in, and he's now missing his two front teeth. Well, he's had to have them built up with composite resin. So that's fun. But kids are going to get injured, aren't they? Like, it's just part of life. But I say that with that caveat in mind. So I want to ask you about sugar, because I know you mentioned processed food and that you won't have it in the house. How do you approach sugar with your kids? I'm guessing they ask for certain things, or they have certain things out the house. Are you just good with them doing what they want out the house, but in the house, you control kind of what comes in?
For the most part, yes. And I am by no means like 100% about this. Like, there are times when there has absolutely been sugar in our house, whether it was people came over or even for special occasions, we had organic cane sugar stuff in the house. I think the mindset of being 100% all or nothing, or defining something as entirely bad, is as problematic or more problematic than any food can be. Just like I say in the converse, if you could be eating the most on paper perfect diet ever, and if you're afraid of it and think it's going to be bad for you, it's going to be bad for you. Mm-hmm. Whereas like your son might be a perfect example. He might be eating only French fries and getting all the nutrients he needs because that's what he's embracing. He doesn't have a negative association with it. Mm-hmm. So I try to just make sure, with a positive context, not a negative. It's not that there's no sugar or vegetable oils or whatever in the house only because those things are bad. It's because we only get to eat a certain number of calories per day before we get full. How can we maximize the benefit of those calories? And so that's the context through which we think of it. And that means, I think it often surprises people. I do not in any way try to give any structure to what the choices they make when they're not in the house. And certainly at birthday parties or at even youth group things, my kids have absolutely eaten processed sugar that I'm sure had dyes and vegetable oils and hydrogenated everything in it. And sometimes they felt really bad when they did that, and they learned awesome lessons from that I feel like are going to benefit them in life far beyond any negative effect of that exposure to all of those things I wouldn't have in my house. Because again, I don't want to override their agency with their choices or how they feel in their body. And I think just like we talked about in the very beginning of we have more data about our own bodies, so do they. And they need to have the ability to make those decisions and feel the effects of them at a young age when they're still so in tune with how their body feels and feel it so quickly. So I don't, if they go to a birthday party, there's no guidance from me ahead of time on like, don't eat the cake or don't eat this or don't eat that. Yeah. And I respect their choices. And then often those lead to amazing conversations after when they don't feel good or when they wake me up at 11 o'clock at night because they ate something they're not used to. And they're like, my stomach hurts. And then we can have a conversation about, ooh, okay, do you want some enzymes or probiotics? Maybe drink some water. This can sometimes happen when you eat things your body may not love. And then they get to make those choices. So yeah, I'm not a dictator of their food by any means.
Yeah. Great advice. You mentioned enzymes, probiotics. What's in your home wellness toolkit? I mean, I know there's going to be like hundreds of things, but what are your top 10 things that you always keep at home that you swear by?
Ooh, such a good question. So we have a whole cabinet of different supplements. And then occasionally they'll come to me with, like, my daughter is a high school track athlete and she's wanting to increase muscle mass this summer. So she'll come with a specific thing like, hey, mom, what could I take that would help with these specific goals, with muscle protein synthesis, with whatever? And then we work on that together. And then she'll take those things. But more often they just have enough knowledge of what's available, or they'll ask questions in the moment to take what they might want at any given time versus having like a regimented supplement schedule. But on the kitchen, I'm also a big fan of putting things in your way. So if you do want to take something regularly, put it someplace you're going to see it. So for me, I put certain things on my nightstand so I remember them. Certain things are on the kitchen table. And so right now, with all the kids and their current goals on the kitchen table, there are capsules of aminos, especially leucine. And then we have enzymes for both digestion. Enzymes are cool because when you take them with food, they can help with the bioavailability of the food. And if you take them on an empty stomach in the morning or at night, they can actually help with cellular cleanup and a lot of other things in the body. So those are on the table. We have probiotics and magnesium because those are big with athletes. Those are very common. And then beyond that, there's a lot of nuanced ones. And I would say there aren't any beyond those that all the kids take. They take different ones at different times. So my oldest had some food intolerances for a while, so he has some gut supportive supplements that he takes. My daughter takes a lot of extra things like collagen and colostrum and silica to help with tendon and muscle growth this summer. Other ones are wanting to like grow their hair faster so they can cut it again to donate it. So they're taking sort of hair supporting, but it's all sort of tailored to what they want at that particular time. And I think also with kids, even Chris Kresser would say now it's hard to get everything we need from food anymore, still giving them the message that as much as possible, we want to start with food and only supplement with what we aren't able to get from food. And so they all eat a lot of protein and a lot of natural sources of fiber and fermented foods, and then would consider probiotics or then would consider supplementing with something beyond that.
So you mentioned as well before about, we just need the light outdoors. We don't necessarily need these expensive red light machines, but are there any pieces of health tech, biohacks, whatever you want to call them, that you do really love and enjoy having at home?
Absolutely. And I think this is also very a both and. Not that I don't think these things are beneficial. I just think start with the free things first.
Yeah.
I haven't really even announced it publicly yet, but I'm actually opening an in-person wellness center where I live to make some of these things more widely available because I do think there's tremendous benefit to them. So our house is very strange. If anybody visited, it does not look like a normal house, but we have some of the things you would expect, like a sauna and cold plunge outside. Right now we have a biocharger in our living room because it's going to go in the wellness space. And we do have the red lights and the PEMF because I've had those for years. But I think the big ones that make it kind of odd in our house is the lighting environment is very specific. So in an ideal world, we just interact with the natural light all day long. But since a lot of us live and work in homes, we have full spectrum daylight bulbs in the ceiling, which mimics the bright light from overhead during the day. And then they're set on timers. So then at sunset, that switches to lamps that are all eye level or below that have amber and only orange spectrum light that would mimic
We have
a
the same.
campfire. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So the light environment, and then I'm big on for kids. It sounds like you probably are too, like let them explore their environment physically as much as possible. So we have a climbing hangboard in the kitchen, a gymnastics mat down the hallway. They have gymnastics rings in their bedroom, and there's a gymnastics wall on the wall in our house. There's things that they can balance on. They like routinely box jump onto the counter or the table. Like they just physically interact with because of that, there are footprints all over my walls, and there are often children swinging from the ceiling. But I think putting those things in their way, there's even a little mini trampoline in place of a coffee table in our living room so that there's just constant ability to move throughout the day. And then at various times, like we have a brain tap that is very helpful for nervous system calming. And so there have been some instances of stress in the last couple of years for us as a family structure. So I brought in things like that just to help realizing that there was an acute stressor and that we could hopefully make a difference there while still addressing all the foundational things. But I think it's just also they say like we shape our environment, yes, by what we put in it, but also our environment shapes us. And so to any degree that we can create an environment that helps shape us into the direction that we're going, I think that's beneficial. And admittedly, I'm not as good as Katie Bowman is with Nutritious Movement, where she has a floor table only. They don't have couches or chairs. They're like squatting and sitting and moving. Haven't gotten quite to that point yet. I think it's awesome, but we have a lot of the odd movement things in our house.
Yeah, I also, because have you heard of Tony Riddle, the natural lifestylist?
Yeah.
So he's a UK. Then all about rewilding. He has that. He lives quite near us, and our kids used to go to the same forest school, and they just have like a low to the floor table. But part of me was like, my dad's nearly 80, and we have a lot of people over, and we host a lot, and the energetics of that for me, they don't feel right in terms of bringing other people in. So, but yeah, and to your point on the lighting, it's so funny because people are like, because when we renovated our house, one of my top priorities was kitting out the whole house in blue light free lighting, and the systems that you said. Ours actually on a timer, but they have there's 3 options. So we use the amber light and the lamps after dark. And people are like, that must have cost a fortune. I'm like, yeah, and they're like, it's so high maintenance. But meanwhile, I got secondhand couches because I didn't want the off-gassing of the foam. So you pick and you choose and you balance it out as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just where the priorities are. I love that you guys are doing that too.
Yeah, I think, like you say, light is so important. Circadian rhythm is so important. I definitely need to put more. You've given me some good ideas of what to put in the house more. One of the things we had that I swore by when they were really little was the Pickler triangle, the Triclimb, and they would be on that constantly. And I found that really great for getting them to learn how to. And we've got like a gymnastics bar, and my daughter's she's a gymnast. She's really into gymnastics, so she's always doing stuff. But you've inspired me to maybe put more stuff in their rooms. So that's great. Right. So where I'm going to go to now is I have an amazing community of like-minded women that we've cultivated this community. We some of us knew each other from before. Some of them are my closest best friends, but we've all become really good friends now. We have a little group. There's about 20 of us. We have a WhatsApp group, and we're just really, really good friends. And so I'm really fortunate to have that. And what I've been doing recently, and I did this with I've done 2 episodes with Morley, and the last one we did this as well, is asking them questions that they want to put to you, to the guests. So I'm going to read out a few of their questions. So the first one, I just find this a really hilarious one, is from Simi. And she says, nutritional yeast, genius ingredient or terrible for you?
Ooh, again, it's going to be, I think, nuanced. I find like my body doesn't do super well with it. And I think depending on methylation genes, people can either do really well with it or not. Totally can understand if someone's trying to follow a plant-based diet, it can be very helpful. My default is always animal protein at this point, because that's what feels best for my body. And some people seem to have a pretty severe negative reaction to nutritional yeast. So I would say, listen to your body on that one, but it wouldn't be my first choice.
Yeah. I said to her, I cut it out a few years ago. Again, methylation, a lot of them fortified with B vitamins. So not great if that's synthetic B vitamins, but interesting. Okay. She also said, how do you know which information to trust when there is so much conflicting information?
I think that is the great journey of our time because we certainly have no lack of access to information. And if information were the answer, we would all be perfectly healthy at this point. I think this actually goes back to where we started with this whole conversation of learning to listen intuitively and actually to your body and what you need, because the answer can vary so much, even within your own context, monthly or daily or seasonally. And I think cultivating that relationship to know what you specifically need outside of what data says that you need is the most valuable work you can do for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So Sanayana asks the top 3 to 5 things you absolutely wouldn't compromise on.
I would say nutritionally, the only things I adamantly avoid, and I still I'm sure I'm exposed at sometimes, are things like vegetable oils and processed seed oils and those kinds of fats. But again, it's that positive, trying to find the positive and focus on those versus avoid the negative. I think sleep forgives many sins, I say. So I am extremely prioritize that in budget. And I would say by outside standards and very high maintenance in sleep, because I think anything we can do that improves the effect of sleep is low effort once we've created the environment for that, and very high ROI. So whether that's blackout curtains, or I have a chili pad on my bed to keep it the right temperature. I have a quite expensive air filter in my room that makes a lot of white noise that helps me sleep. I take certain supplements at night for sleep. I have an EMF canopy on my bed. So I'm extremely high maintenance about sleep, and I see the ROI from that. I think connected to that, also that morning sunlight is one thing I would not compromise on. And ideally, if you can be barefoot in nature or get movement at the same time and hydration, you can habit stack and get a lot of benefit there. I would say if I had to forego all supplements, I would still try to get minerals from natural sources as much as possible, even if it was just salt. I think that one's extremely overlooked. And then I would say, even from a clinical data perspective, I think community is a non-negotiable, because we now know that loneliness is more dangerous than smoking. And I've said for years, I think the actual commonality of the blue zones is not what they eat or how much they move, but the fact that they do it in community, and that anything we do for our health, but that we do with people that we love, actually has additional benefit. And so I think if we all prioritized and in today's world cultivated, because it doesn't necessarily happen organically anymore, but if we cultivated really strong community, I think that also gives us a lot more leeway in other areas of health because of how nourishing it is to our nervous systems, to our emotions, on a relational level. Like, that's such a vital human need that I think is missing in a lot of the modern world, where we're technologically connected, but not proximally connected.
And do you have people around you that are like-minded? Because it's hard to find people that, are, as, I say, quote unquote, high maintenance as us in that respect.
I do, and I'm super grateful. And it was something that I intentionally chose, prioritized, and worked toward for a long time. So I didn't used to. And about 10 years ago, I actually started a mastermind of blogging families who were in the health world, who had kids and who had similar ideas on things. And they, at the time, we were all over the country. And I sort of literally picked these people out online from knowing their blogs or knowing their information, and just kind of said, hey, you're my people. Do you want to meet up? And our first one, we met up at a huge cabin in the woods with all of our collectively 20 plus kids. And we stayed there for a week, and the parents all got to hang out and work on business stuff. And the kids built a literal village in the woods out of logs they had found, and lifelong friendships were formed. And now we all have moved and live close to each other. And so we actually have proximal, like, daily ability to see each other. But it was a very intentional choice for all of us, because you're right, we don't just live in like cul-de-sacs anymore where we have so much in common necessarily with our neighbors. It's awesome if that happens organically, but I feel like often we have to really put effort in today's world. So I literally sort of pitched those people from the ether, and we're like, we're friends now. And thankfully they agreed.
That's amazing. And that week in the woods sounds like what an amazing memory.
Yeah, we've done it now like many times since then. And then now we all live close, so we don't have to travel to hang out. But
amazing. Okay. And just when you were talking about like the EMF canopy on your bed, I just can't stop thinking that it's so hard to have like gorgeous interior design when you live holistically.
Well, my only decorating style is houseplants and apparently gymnastics equipment. So I don't have a magazine-worthy home by any means.
Yeah. So Amy's one has a bit of a ramble of why won't my kids fall asleep? Why does it take them so excuse me. Have a sip of water. Why does it take my kids so long to fall asleep? And then that led on to, okay, is there something you use or give them that helps them fall asleep a bit easier?
Yeah, this is one where, especially with kids and not knowing their ages or any of the factors that could be contributing, I would say kind of work in the triage of anything you optimize at night will also help in the morning for energy and vice versa. I think light's a huge component here. So I've seen families where just addressing the I think that's worth addressing before trying anything supplemental, and depending on the age, obviously being very careful with supplements. But as they get older, like things like magnesium, although there's a very small subset of the population, which I found out I am in, that I sort of react opposite to magnesium and a lot of things that operate on the GABA pathway. So I'm an inverse modulator and I take those things in the morning. Most people can benefit from taking magnesium at night. So assuming your child isn't in that very small group, they can benefit from taking magnesium at night. And in the modern world, there's almost everybody is not getting enough magnesium. So that's an easy starter one that's considered relatively safe. If it's available, it might be worth looking into if there could be any underlying food intolerances or more wide scale, either deficiencies or toxicities from something, because often those can cause enough nervous system upset that sleep can be difficult. But often, depending on the age of the kids, even just having a really solid routine can help because their brains are so easily adaptable that if you start putting routine in place leading up to bedtime for a couple hours before, that can help train their minds and their nervous systems to sleep more easily. And then the other one that has made a big difference with my kids is we try to eat dinner as early as possible. So often at 5 o'clock, even if it's not getting dark till 6:30 or 7, which allows plenty of time for digestion before they have to go to bed. It's actually quite natural for them to not be sleepy if they're still digesting because their body's in a different biological process. So if you can shift dinner a little bit earlier, and then beyond that, there are some really cool products that have adaptive mushrooms like reishi in them that can be made into like what they think is a hot chocolate or something that can help them sort of calm down at night. But it is going to be very child specific. So just sort of experimenting with them, letting them be involved in that experimentation and sort of figuring out what works.
So one of the questions, a comment that came through from one of the other women in the community was when you have a neurodiverse child, none of the stuff that works for everyone else works for them. And what's been interesting to witness in our community is we all raise our children very holistically. So the things that we thought were contributing to this rise in neurodiversity are not applying to our children. So it's been really interesting witnessing it. And I think, we're in London, and I think that makes a difference as well, because there's so many environmental interferences, so much Wi-Fi. I also think that how many of us took the pill for so long plays a part in that. But I wonder how you would manage things differently, or are any of your kids particularly in any way neurodiverse?
Yeah, one of them was, especially when he was younger, and we did pretty intensive protocols with him over time, and he's interacts with the world much differently now. I like to say, if anything, he got to keep the superpowers that come with that and be able to interact with the world a little bit more easily. I take the frame of reference that I think actually neurodiversity is very much a superpower, and that some of the things that we're trying to mitigate in these kids, if we actually taught them the strengths of it and how to interact with it in a way that benefited them, it might end up being a tremendous superpower. And vulnerably, I actually found out as an adult that I have relatively severe ADHD that I didn't know about until I did brain scans for a podcast guest who was coming on to talk about it. And he goes, "Has your ADHD ever gotten in your way?" And I'm like, "That's the first I've heard of it. So no, I guess not." But
is that Dr. Amen by any chance?
No, although he's wonderful too. This was Dr. Hill in Los Angeles. And we did brain scans, actually had all the kids do brain scans with him as well. Wow. And a lot of them exhibited markers of that. But for me, it seems to relate to, I had a skull fracture when I was 9 months old. And that led to like some compensation in my brain, which he said actually maybe really helps with executive function because I learned to compensate so young. But I just think like, for one, it's helpful to them psychologically if we don't frame these things as a problem, but rather as like a gift that can be nurtured, and let them understand that it's not bad. It's actually like a unique part about them that they just get to learn to navigate the world a little bit differently. And they probably have some hidden superpowers within that. I know Jim Quick talks about that as well. He had extreme learning disabilities, and those have certainly, as he's grown, he's learned to make those his superpowers.
Yeah, he certainly has. He was actually the one that got my husband really, really into this journey. Like my husband read Limitless, and that was it. It resonated because well, for so many reasons, but yeah, I think that, I totally agree with you about kind of showing them how to utilize, what they've got innately. It's just, it can be really challenging raising children like that and trying to figure out how to best support them through it. But I know with my son, like, it's he neurodiverse. I don't know. He has sensory stuff, so I guess that would be considered neurodiversity in some way. But he's such an empath, and I think that is what I figured out. His nervous system often feels unsafe because he feels things so deeply. But I was exactly the same, and I didn't have the same support of my caregivers understanding that I was an empath and being able to give me the guidance around it. And so we do a lot of emotion code work now with him, and I think that helps a lot. And he has all the tools around him. But when he's in the midst of it, he can't think about any of the tools. But at least when he comes out of it, he knows that there are things he can use to help him. So just providing our kids with the tools to help wherever they're at, I think is also really beneficial. So the last one is also from Simi, and it's what's the best piece of advice you've received as a mum?
Ooh.
Which is hard when you're put on the spot, right?
That is a little hard when you're put on the spot. There's so many different versions of this I've gotten, so I'll kind of summarize them into one piece of advice, which is that so much more is caught than taught. And I've learned and seen play out over the years. It matters sometimes so much less what we say and so much more what we do, which we know, and doesn't make it any easier to do those things. But I've noticed often if I'm able to model something without attachment, I think that's another big piece of it. And be in the energy of doing it because I love it, because I know it's beneficial. They pick up on that so rapidly. So like I've never told my kids to go get morning sunlight. They've just seen me do it their whole lives. And now my daughter gets up earlier than I do, and I'll find her on the front porch sitting in the sunshine reading a book. And I think we often maybe underestimate how much they're paying attention to you. And I've heard so many versions of that, like your children will do a terrible job of doing what you say, but they'll do a great job of becoming you, essentially. And so I use that to remind myself to hold myself to the standard versus try to hold them to the standard. And I've even seen it play out in silly ways. Like for years, I used to hope and think like, oh, I hope they want to take voice lessons. I hope they want to take music lessons. And then I realized it was because I wish I had done that as a kid. And then I realized, oh, I still can do that. And so I started taking voice lessons. And then ironically or not, they all developed an interest in music in their own ways. And so I think often, and also that they're these perfect little mirrors. And so anytime I feel triggered or feel big emotions coming up related to my kids, I get to realize that A, I'm responsible for those emotions, of course, not them, but B, also that's showing me somewhere that I'm maybe not free. And often whatever is going on at their age is actually reminding me and triggering something in me that happened at that age. And so it's actually a beautiful insight that I wouldn't otherwise get. And so if I can just be present in that moment instead of just like letting the big emotions come out, but asking them questions and sitting with them and not resisting them, it's often incredible to see what I'm able to find out about myself through the reflection of those kids.
So true that they're such a mirror for us. That's why they're the best teachers, right? One question I haven't asked you yet that I just will end on, let's talk about wellness. I mean, unbelievable. I was so happy when you created, especially the toothpastes. In my community, toothpaste has been one of the biggest topics for so long. It's like, what's right? What's not right? How do you get it right? Well, oh my God, what a minefield. And your toothpaste have been, yeah, just incredible for my family because the kids love the strawberry one, and we love the mint one. So how did that come about? And I guess just thank you for creating it.
Oh, thank you. And that's awesome to hear. I'm so glad you guys like that. For me, that really came from realizing that, well, on the thyroid conversation, for one, fluoride can be a very nuanced, tricky thing, especially if you have thyroid issues. It can interfere a lot. And so for years, I was in search of a toothpaste that didn't have all these problematic things. And there wasn't at the time one on the market that didn't also have glycerin, which for my teeth tended to make them more yellow, which was the opposite direction I was trying to go. But I realized even some of my closest friends in person who eat organic, who really prioritize their health, they were still using certain conventional products, and it was because they worked. And I realized, like, even those of us that want to make the healthy choice, sometimes there's things we don't want to sacrifice, whether that's how, if our teeth are white or how our hair looks. And so I realized for us to be able to make an easy switch, there had to be something that was beyond safe and organic that worked as
It
well. And
worked,
so,
yeah.
and I used to, for a decade, I made my own toothpaste at home, and the recipe is still on my
I
site, but I
used your
realized,
recipe many times. Yeah.
but moms are the busiest people on the planet. And I realized most moms didn't want to go order dozens of ingredients to have half a teaspoon of this ingredient to make a toothpaste that they didn't have time to make. And so that was why I started making it commercially and then have expanded from there, just realizing also from an 80/20 perspective that we know women are actually exposed to the most chemical exposure from personal care products.
Mm.
Because we use more products than men in general, but that if you 80/20 it, the majority of that exposure comes from things like oral health products and hair care. And so if we could find better alternatives that were an easy switch in those areas, even without being perfect and avoiding everything that's problematic out there, you could make a big difference in your toxic burden by just those simple switches. And those are products used by the whole family. So if they were easy switches, the whole family could benefit. So that's
Mm.
why I started with those.
I love it. Thank you.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
so we're going to go to all about you, which is my rapid fire round. We've probably answered these questions in some way, but let's do it anyway. The first one is always the same, and it's wellness is.
I would say wellness is a state of mind first and foremost, and that exhibits in the actions and the practicality of it.
Mhm.
I think it's a state of being, and my words for this year, I feel like line up with that, which are grace, ease, and joy.
Mm.
And I think if the more we're able to operate in the states of grace and ease and joy and peace, then the easier all of the expressions of wellness that we consider in the physical realm become.
Can you see that poster behind me? Joy, ease, surrender. Very similar.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, they're my phrases as well. I've always been a very intense person. So those emotions have not always come easy for me. It's been something I've had to teach myself, being such a, intense person. My spiritual journey has helped me immensely with that. But it just, because I know that there are many other people like me, that it's not just this natural thing that I'm just always, joyful and in ease. And so it's just, that constant reminder of how beneficial it is. So I love that answer. Your best piece of advice to someone starting out on a health journey, feeling very overwhelmed about all the information.
Ooh, I'm going to borrow something from someone who I've been following for a while that I love how she says this at the beginning of every advice. She's a doctor and a very good researcher, and she still starts with see yourself well. And I think that the mindset piece being the first piece is huge and often overlooked. I think there's, like I said, no limit of access to information. That's not what we need, is more information. I think if we start with seeing ourselves well, then everything can ripple from there. Whereas conversely, if we view everything as problematic, it will be. And not that mindset alone shifts all the ways that we interact with the world physically, but I think it starts there. And that was a lesson that was very slow learned for me.
Yeah, same. Where do you see medicine in 30 years?
Where I hope we see it with all of the amazing data and access to personalized data that we have is an ability to take a minimum effective dose 80/20 subtractive, not additive approach to getting the data to know what our individual bodies actually need. And I think this will also shed light on some of these universal things we talked about that we're not getting, that the human animal needs. But I think we are very close and already have some of this information available. It's just still very pricey. And so my hope is that in the next few decades, we will see the barrier of entry to a lot of that come down greatly, and that we will all have the ability to, without huge cost, really step into the empowerment of being our own primary healthcare providers with the data to back it up, and then the resources to back up what we know based on the data.
Here's hoping. We can only hope. It's a beautiful note to end on. Obviously, I will put everything in the show notes, but can you let people know where they can find you?
I'm Wellness Mama everywhere online. So everything lives at wellnessmama.com, and there's links there to everywhere else.
Amazing. Katie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun. You're a phenomenal interviewer.
Oh, thank you. That's such a nice thing to say. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reconditioned. I am honestly so grateful to each and every person that tunes in. Thank you also for taking responsibility for your own well-being. You should know that just by choosing to listen to podcasts like this that further your well-being, you're moving more deeply into abundance consciousness. Now, don't forget, I have a bunch of free resources over at laurenvakneen.co.uk, as well as every recommendation you could ever need in regards to your well-being on the LV Recommends page, all categorized for your ease. Thank you also to our sponsors. These episodes would not be possible without them, so make sure to check them out and get some pretty awesome discounts on the show notes. And of course, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you can get updated each time a new one is released. Thank you. I appreciate you.